Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Mike. You guys are rocking with me on Mike's Intellectual Corner. On today's episode, we are going to be diving back into our Napoleonic Wars series. This is Napoleon's invasion of Russia, 1812. And without further ado, just like always, we're going to go right into it. Let's go.
Russia, 1812. Napoleon invades his former ally with the largest army Europe has ever seen. But for the French Emperor, the decisive blow remains frustratingly beyond reach. Russia's resilience is unlike anything he's ever encountered.
And that's saying something if you really think about it, because, as we've just been encountering, he's been having to deal with the Peninsular War for the past, at least a few years now. I can't think of the exact number, but at least a few years now. And he's just, but this is about to be even worse than that, so it's kind of crazy to think.
Is unlike anything he's ever encountered. And as winter closes in, his army begins the most infamous retreat in history. In 1807, following his defeat of the Russian army at Friedland, Napoleon had travelled to Tilsit to meet the Russian Emperor Alexander. During their celebrated encounter, the two emperors formed a friendship and made an alliance. But it was not to last. Over the next 5 years, relations between France and Russia cooled dramatically. The Russians were irritated by Napoleon's creation of a Duchy of Warsaw in Poland, which they regarded as meddling in their own front yard. They feared it would lead to the return of a fully fledged Polish state, a traditional thorn in Russia's side. Then there was Napoleon's offer to marry Alexander's sister, Grand Duchess Anna Pavlovna, to cement their alliance. But the Romanovs hated the idea, and after a year of Russian prevarication, Napoleon married Marie-Louise, daughter of the Austrian emperor, instead.
Yeah, in my opinion, I think that Napoleon definitely should have went towards Russia, cementing his alliance and stuff with them instead of with Austria and stuff. Because with Austria, if you think about it, he could do anything he wanted with them in the first place, because he's already humiliated them in countless battles and everything else, and took away so much land at this point. There's no need to really, all you gotta do is really subjugate them. With Russia, though, Russia is still an independent, essentially, nation who can still go to war with you if they want to. And if you have them, you have the entire continent, minus Scandinavia, which even really you have that if you stay out of Swedish territory, but what I'm saying.
Austrian emperor instead. Later that year, Napoleon broke a guarantee made at Tilsit and annexed the Duchy of Oldenburg, ruled by Alexander's sister's father-in-law. Worst of all was the fallout over the continental system, Napoleon's not very effective economic blockade against Britain, designed to cripple his most steadfast enemy. Alexander had agreed to join the continental system at Tilsit, but it was hugely unpopular in Russia and ruinous to her finances during a period of economic crisis. When Napoleon found out that Russia was flouting the rules of the system and had resumed an illicit trade with Britain, he was furious. With both emperors accusing the other of bad faith, their two countries began preparing for war.
Yeah, in my opinion, Tsar Alexander had every right in his power to do exactly what he did. Napoleon was showing blatant disregard that he doesn't care about Russia's economy. As long as his continental system is still up in play, he doesn't really care.
Napoleon knew an invasion of Russia was a massive undertaking, especially as he still had an unfinished war in Spain that was tying down more than 200,000 troops. Nevertheless, in 1811 he began to assemble the largest army Europe had ever seen, around 600,000 men, though less than half of them were French. The rest came from allied states across Europe. There was a Polish corps from the Duchy of Warsaw, led by Prince Poniatowski, a corps from each of the German kingdoms of Saxony, Westphalia and Bavaria, from the Kingdom of Italy, as well as Swiss, Dutch, Croat, Spanish and Portuguese units scattered throughout the army. There were even contingents from Prussia and Austria, France's recent enemies, now uneasy allies. Some of these allied troops, such as the Poles and Germans, were as reliable as their French counterparts. Others were very inexperienced, or, like the Prussians and Austrians, reluctant to be there at all. This gigantic formation was deployed in 3 armies: the main force under Napoleon himself, another led by his stepson Eugene, and a third led by his younger brother Jerome, King of Westphalia. Neither of these two were experienced commanders. Though one would distinguish himself on campaign, the other would not. On their left flank, Marshal MacDonald led 10th Corps with a large Prussian contingent, while the right flank was guarded by General Schwarzenberg's Austrian Corps. Another 100,000 troops were in reserve, including Marshal Victor's 9th Corps. Initially, the Russians only had...
And it's crazy too, because if you think about it, they could have, Napoleon could have invaded Russia with almost like a little under 1 million men, or up to 1 million men, you know, almost 200 years before freaking the Germans did it in World War II with 3 million men. But, because you know what I'm saying, he had 250,000, a little bit, probably a little bit more, bogged down still in Peninsular War. So, you know, it's almost like he's on a two-front war without really being a two-front war, because and I think in Spain they're not invading, they're just trying to get them out. So
initially, the Russians only had 220,000 men to face this juggernaut, organized into Barclay de Tolly's First Army, Prince Bagration's Second Army, and General Tomasov's Third Army. They would be outnumbered 2-1. But in the run-up to war, Russia scored 2 crucial diplomatic triumphs. Sweden had been at war with Russia just 3 years earlier, a conflict which cost her Finland. By a curious turn of events, Sweden was now ruled by Napoleon's ex-marshal Bernadotte. But after Napoleon occupied Swedish Pomerania without warning, a furious Bernadotte promised Russia that Sweden would remain neutral. Meanwhile, a peace treaty with the Ottoman Empire ended Russia's 6-year war against its southern rival. These 2 agreements secured Russia's flanks from any strategic threat and freed up troops to face...
And it's crazy too that, if you think about it, these 2 events, you know, the continental situation and him occupying Swedish territory it's almost leading up to his demise, if you think about it, because these 2 are very huge events that's going to lead to, one, Sweden going on to the other coalition at the end and leading to his defeat and everything else. So it's just kind of crazy to see it all unfolding.
Napoleon's invasion. On the 24th of June 1812, French troops began crossing the Niemen River into Russian territory. The army was so large, the crossing took 5 days. Napoleon's plan was to attack north of the impassable Pripet marshes and defeat Barclay's army, while Jerome pinned Bagration in place. French forces would then swing south to trap Bagration. Napoleon expected the campaign to be over in 5 weeks. But the sheer size of the French army convinced the cautious Barclay that retreat was his only option. Prince Bagration, a much more aggressive commander by instinct, and often Barclay's fierce critic, was forced to agree. As they withdrew, they burned villages and crops, part of a scorched earth strategy.
You know, I wonder if Napoleon would have split up that humongous freaking army, because you can already tell this thing is about to be like a huge problem with how big it is. He's so used to his signature corps. It's not the same, and it's looking more. It's resembling more of an Austrian type of military. I think where it's just like a big clunking thing. Just, you know what I'm saying, not instead of in strategic, motion and stuff like that. But I wonder if he would have split it up like that, if he would have baited them into coming in instead of retreating, resulting in a whole different outcome in this war. You know what I'm saying? So,
part of a scorched earth strategy to deny supplies to the enemy. In 4 days, Napoleon had reached Vilnius, but Barclay was gone. To the south, Jérôme failed to pin down Bagration. So when Davout's First Corps swung southeast to trap him, he'd already withdrawn to safety. Napoleon's younger brother was out of his depth. Stung by the Emperor's criticism, humiliated when his troops were put under Marshal Davout's command, he resigned his post and returned to Westphalia.
Just like Marshal Marmont in Spain, you have to know how to, march your troops. Otherwise, just like Marshal Marmont in Spain, you just gave up, some type of position, essentially, and that's not good. And with this, they not only did he give up the positions, but he also let the entire army get out of his possession, to where they probably would have, caught them and, essentially got them. But
post and returned to Westphalia. The campaign was already beginning to expose serious flaws in Napoleon's plan. Knowing his troops would struggle to live off the land in this impoverished region, he'd organized huge supply depots and transport units to feed the army. But wagons rolled slowly along Russia's bad roads, which were turned to rivers of mud by summer thunderstorms. The army had to make frequent stops to allow its supplies to catch up. Bad news for Napoleon's plan to catch the Russians, but a much-needed relief for the many thousands of young conscripts in his army, not used to hard marches day after day. Many were soon dropping out with exhaustion. Others deserted. There were also huge problems of command and control over a vast multinational army that was 3 times bigger than any Napoleon had commanded before. La Grande Armée, once famed for its speed of maneuver, had become a lumbering beast.
Kind of reminds you of the Battle of Thermopylae and the huge lumbering beast that was the Persian army having to go up against citizens 300.
At Vilnius, Napoleon resumed his advance. Barclay continued his retreat to Vitebsk, where he hoped Bagration's Second Army would be able to join him. But Davout blocked Bagration's path at Sultanovka, forcing him to make for Smolensk instead. At Vitebsk, Napoleon clashed with Barclay's rearguard, but once more the Russians escaped, after setting fire to all the stores they couldn't take with them. Meanwhile, 300 miles away, on Napoleon's southern flank, Russian Third Army attacked and defeated the Saxon Seventh Corps, forcing Napoleon to divert Schwarzenberg's Austrian Corps to their aid. By the end of July, Napoleon had advanced 250 miles into Russia, much further than he'd planned. And the long marches in extreme summer heat continued to take a heavy toll on his men.
I don't know, what do you guys think? I think Napoleon almost needed a little bit more time and planning for this. Mainly with, I feel like, better supplies and stuff like that, but is what I'm getting. Better training for his men, mainly. Maybe he could have trained the officers to train his men to do more of the Grand Army style of fighting and marching and all that stuff in corps. The only thing that sucks that would have been with, though, is just the fact that they're doing that scorched earth tactic, and his cores kind of have to live off the land. So that's the only thing that would have deflected from that.
Extreme summer heat continued to take a heavy toll on his men. Without fighting a major battle, the army had already suffered 20% casualties from exhaustion and illness, particularly typhus and dysentery. The army had entered Russia with 250,000 horses, but they were now dying at a rate of 1,000 every day from exhaustion and lack of fodder. It wasn't just cavalry horses that were dying, but the very horses that were supposed to haul the army's transport wagons, making a bad situation worse. This crisis in horsepower came just as the French light cavalry, Napoleon's eyes and ears, met their match in Russia's Cossacks.
Yeah, I bet you could just see this thing, if you could look above and you can get an aerial view of this army marching, I guarantee you it looks almost, like a snail with it leaving a trail, except that trail is made of dead bodies, of men, horses. I bet you supplies, I bet you guarantee you, how they used to have those big, huge cauldrons to cook their food and stuff. I bet you $5 those privates who were having to carry it, or one of them who were, as they passed it around, said, F this, and the rest of them said it too, and you could just see those things start to fly off too. It's just one of those things where, this was not the best planned, attack.
In Russia's Cossacks. Cossacks, self-reliant, proud, ruthless, and superb horsemen, didn't play by the same rules as other European cavalry. Every day they shadowed Napoleon's army, swooping in whenever they saw an easy target, but melting away into the forests if they were attacked by a stronger force.
Man, I bet you that even that alone probably had a psychological effect on Napoleon's men, just seeing them, because they could probably see them, trotting along in the distance and stuff, knowing that if something happened and they, fell off or something and they just, couldn't catch back up, they're going to get swooped off, they're going to get picked off, killed, and then, that probably has to do something seeing that, so.
Stronger force. Cossacks, as well as Russian partisans, made hit-and-run attacks on French supply lines and depots, forcing Napoleon to divert thousands of troops to their defense. Alongside Russian regular light cavalry, they also prevented French patrols from carrying out reconnaissance, which meant that Napoleon often lacked good information about roads or the enemy's whereabouts. Napoleon stayed 16 days at Vitebsk, resting his troops and considering his options. Among his many mounting concerns was the security of his long, exposed flanks. But at Vitebsk, he received news that Schwarzenberg had defeated the Russians at Gorodezhna. A week later at Polotsk, a French Bavarian force fought Wittgenstein's Russian First Corps to a standstill. Napoleon's flanks were secure, for now. Although his main force had been reduced to less than half its original strength, Napoleon decided to push on to Smolensk and try to force the Russians into a decisive battle for the city.
That's insane if you think about it, because Napoleon himself hasn't even fought the Russians. He's just been marching this entire time. According to this anyway, I have to do a little bit more research just to make sure, but according to this, he's just been marching the entire time, and he's already lost 40,000 men in his army alone. 40,000 men just from heat exhaustion, probably hunger exhaustion, everything. Just 40,000. That's an entire army's worth. That's insane. He hasn't even fought like that. You can already tell that's a bad omen in itself. You know what I'm saying?
Decisive battle for the city. Barclay was indeed under pressure to give battle from fellow commander Prince Bagration and Emperor Alexander in St. Petersburg. The army's morale and Russia's honor required it, they told him. With the First and Second Russian armies finally linking up near Smolensk, Barclay decided to attack Napoleon's army, which he believed was concentrated around Rudnya. The offensive was led by General Platov's Cossacks, who surprised a French cavalry division at Inkovo. But alarmed by false reports that Eugene's 4th Corps was outflanking him to the north, Barclay called off the attack. Napoleon, reassured that Barclay's offensive posed no real threat, began a grand outflanking move to the south to take Smolensk and cut off the Russian retreat. The so-called Smolensk maneuver was Napoleon at his best, using Murat's cavalry to screen his movements and keep Barclay in the dark. The Emperor reached the Dnieper on the evening of the 13th of August. His engineers quickly threw up 4 pontoon bridges, and by dawn the next day, his army was across. Marshal Davout led a second column across the river at Orsha. But a single Russian division, the 27th, fought a heroic fighting retreat from Krasny, delaying the French advance and buying time for Bagration to reinforce the Smolensk garrison. The chance for a surprise assault on the city was lost. And as the Russian army began to pull back, Napoleon displayed an uncharacteristic lack of urgency, even halting the army for a parade to mark his 43rd birthday.
He must have already felt like he already won or something, because, I mean, if you think about it, if Marshall would have done that type of stuff, granted, cut out the birthday stuff, because anybody other than Napoleon doing that, they probably would have. Obviously, they're not getting away with that, but just the slowness and the halting alone. If anybody else would have did that, I guarantee you, he would have took away their freaking martial baton and everything else. You know what I'm saying? Like, so that is very uncharacteristic of him.
To mark his 43rd birthday. When the main attack on Smolensk began 2 days later, Napoleon opted for a frontal assault. 150 French guns battered the city as 3 French corps attacked its medieval fortifications. The Russians resisted bravely, but Barclay, fearing encirclement, ordered another retreat. With Smolensk in flames, the Russians began to pull out. Just as the French fought their way into the city, to scenes of utter devastation. Bagration's Second Army withdrew first. As Barclay's army followed, its rear guard was caught by Ney's Third Corps at Valutino. General Junot, commanding the Westphalian 8th Corps, had orders to cut off Barclay's retreat. But having crossed the river, he did nothing, and the opportunity was lost. A furious Napoleon swore that Junot would never now win his marshal's baton. The Battle of Smolensk cost both sides around 10,000 casualties, and destroyed one of Russia's most historic and holy cities, but settled nothing. After the missed chance to defeat the Russians at Smolensk, Napoleon paused once more to consider his options. His men were weary and far from home, and it was already late in the campaigning season. He considered sitting out the Russian winter at Smolensk and resuming the campaign in 1813. But now he was just 230 miles from Moscow. A century earlier, Peter the Great had moved Russia's capital to St. Petersburg, but Moscow remained its historic and spiritual heart, a prize for which the Russians had to fight. Napoleon, always a gambler, decided to push on. The Russians faced their own dilemma. Emperor Alexander had experienced a kind of religious epiphany that summer and rallied the Russian people to the country's defense, describing the war with Napoleon as a war to save Holy Mother Russia from the Antichrist.
And I wonder if, like some of the I don't want to say peasants, but some of the just normal civilians living out their normal lives. Say not in France anyway. I wonder if that's how they viewed Napoleon, because Napoleon was a kind of a bigger than life character. You know what I'm saying? Character. Like I don't even feel like we don't even know what that like saying feels like to have somebody like that around. So to them, was he like really actually being viewed like this could actually be the Antichrist, and if he wins, you know what I'm saying, like, which is kind of crazy to think about, but.
From the Antichrist. For months, the emperor had received conflicting advice to stand and fight or retreat. Now he decided change was needed. The cautious General Barclay kept his job, but the emperor summoned General Mikhail Kutuzov to take overall command of Russia's armies. Kutuzov had been beaten by Napoleon at Austerlitz 7 years before, but he'd since won several victories against the Ottoman Empire and was a true Russian, loved by the troops. Although Kutuzov agreed with Barclay's strategy of delay, he saw that constant retreats were destroying the soldiers' and the nation's morale. If Moscow was given up without a battle, the fallout could be disastrous. And so, 70 miles west of the city, near the village of Borodino, the Russian army prepared to make a stand. Europe was about to witness the bloodiest day's fighting of the Napoleonic Wars.
Yeah, very. I mean, what do you expect though when you have a juggernaut and proud country like Russia going up against each other? You know what I'm saying? Like, and you know what I'm saying? Everybody's already been drilling into the Russian officers' heads. Like, hey, we have to fight. We have to fight now. Win or lose, we have to. You know what I'm saying? Like, this isn't. This, you know what I'm saying? We're too proud to just keep retreating like this. You know what I'm saying? But with that being said, though, thank you guys again for joining me on another episode of Micah's Intellectual Corner. I'll see you guys on another one. I'm out.